Hello everyone, this is Yana Smakula for SimonsSTM.com. Welcome back for another Yippee For Yana episode. In this video, I'm creating interactive cards with the Simon Says Stamp Polar Christmas stamp set. So here's a look at the stamp set. It's a large 6x8 stamp with absolutely fabulous and adorable penguins doing all sorts of winter activities. We have penguins, building a snowman, decorating a Christmas tree, being out in the open and just enjoying the snow. I'm going to start working on my cards. I am making 2 cards today by doing some stamping just as usual. So here I have a Mini Misty stamping tool. I have a sheet of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock inside the Misty, and I'm going to stamp the 2 penguins that I like the most using Memento Tuxedo Black ink. I will be making interactive cards, and the interactivity is going to be provided by using a mini wobbler. So my penguins are going to wobble or move slightly from side to side on my cards. Because I wanted them to wobble, I picked these specific penguins for my project. I'm going to do some coloring next, and the coloring is going to be super simple. I'm using just a handful of Copic markers and doing quick and basic coloring here. So I started with the C10, C9, and C7 markers, and these are going to provide the black color for the penguins. You can, of course, use a black marker and just do a solid layer of black, but I wanted to have a little bit of a color variation here, just some highlighted and shaded areas, and I can achieve that by using these 3 markers. I also used the C5 marker for the penguin at the top, so I did a little bit of a more intensive blending there because the black area on the penguin at the top is just a little bit larger, and I had more room for my blending. But these are basically the colors that I'm using for the black areas on these images. Next, I used YR15 and YR04 to color the noses and the feet of these adorable little critters. An R20 marker was used to add blush to these, and then I used several shades of red to color the scarf and the hat red on the bottom penguin. I started with the R05, R24, and R27 to add that red color here. I wanted to have, a traditional Christmas color combination, although I don't have any green, but I did want to add a ton of vibrant red, especially to this penguin because he is all dressed up for winter. He has this adorable scarf and his funky little hat, and I really wanted to color these red. Of course, you can also color these green or blue, or even add pattern and texture to these by maybe stamping the same image onto pattern paper, cutting that out, and doing some paper piecing. That would look really fun as well. Next, I used a C5 marker to color the metal part of the sled. And then for the wooden part of the sled, I first used red markers, the same ones that I used for the hat and the scarf, but I actually didn't like the way that looked. It was just looking a little bit like too much red on my card. So I later switched to brown markers and came in with several shades of brown to darken that and turn it into a sort of like a red-brown color. So here you can see me using E33. That didn't really work well. And then I'm switching to the E37 to make this more of a mahogany color, I guess you can say. So yeah, I like the brown better, but I like also that the brown has a lot of the red in it. And finally, I'm using E79 to add some round shading here to the sled. Next, I'm using W3 marker and W1 marker. I wasn't sure if I wanted to use these or not, if I wanted to keep the bellies of my penguins true white, but I figured I did want to add some shading to the inside of the bellies and the faces. So here I'm using these 2 markers to add a little bit of shading. I'm also coming in with this colorless blender. This is a 0 marker from Olo because I have misplaced my Copic colorless blender. It doesn't matter which colorless blender or 0 marker you use. If you if you're using a different brand alcohol marker, they all work the same. They all complement each other. So I used a colorless blender or a zero marker from Olo to soften that. Next, I'm using a B000 marker to color the snow on the bottom penguin and also the piece of ice on the top penguin. And that pretty much finishes my coloring. I'm just going to add that same W3 and W1 coloring to the penguin at the top. Again, soften that with a colorless blender or a zero marker. And this is going to complete my coloring. I used a white Jelly Roll pen to fix some of the marker bleeding because my marker did bleed in a few sections. So I fixed that. And now I'm using the same pen. This is Sakura Jelly Roll pen in size 0.8. And I'm using it to add white highlights to my penguins. I really like to do this. I feel like that adds sort of a cartoony look and style to my images, and I really like that. So whenever I can, I will add those highlights to my colored images. I'm not an expert when it comes to these highlights. I don't really know where to add them. I just add them where it makes sense, like one highlight at a time, and that seems to work just fine. There are coordinating dies available for these images, and I've cut mine apart using the metal wire cutters. And now I'm using Best Ever Craft Tape from Spellbinders to secure the coordinating die over my stamped images. I want to make sure that the dies are aligned. And next, I'm using my Platinum 6 die cutting and embossing machine and cutting these cuties out. And check them out. Aren't they adorable? Just the cutest. Okay. Let's go ahead and make a card now. So I had this idea that I wanted to ink blend a pool of water, or like a pile of snow or something. I wanted to have an area that would help me ground these critters. So I used a sheet of cardstock. This is again the same Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And I used a pencil and I just drew a random blob on the panel. There's no rhyme or reason to this shape. It's just like a random oval blob that works well for the idea that I have in mind. You can use a stencil if you have a stencil with a shape like this or a similar shape, or if you don't want to do a blob, you can use an oval stencil and just ink blend a background through that oval. I wanted a blob, so I drew a blob using a pencil, and now I'm using scissors and I'm just cutting the inside out, creating a mask that I can use to ink blend backgrounds for my penguins. Very easy to do. This is not going to be a one-time use mask. If you use cardstock, it will work for a few ink blending sessions. If you use thin cardstock, your mask will probably just last you for one card. So I'm going to tape the mask onto another panel. Again, Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. So I've taped the two pieces together, and I'm going to use the Seafoam ink. This is the Positively Saturated ink by Simon Says Stamp, and a large blending brush. And I'm going to do just a solid layer of color here. So again, I'm ink blending a blob in the center of my panel to help me ground my critter. You can do an ombre ink blending, you can do some faded ink blending, whatever you want. I just wanted to have this nice seafoam color in the center of the panel. I wasn't trying to make this perfect. I knew I would be adding some splatter over this, so I just added, a basic layer of color. Next, I'm going to stamp my sentiment. So I'm bringing my Mini Misty stamping tool back into the view. And here I have the sentiment that I selected. For this card, my sentiment is going to say, "You are so cool." And I'm using the new Versaclear ink by Tsukineko and Simon Says Stamp, and I'm just stamping that inside the blob. I did place the penguin there just to figure out the placement, as I wanted the penguin to sit above the sentiment. Now I still have the mask in place, and while I have the mask in place, I'm going to add some white splatter. I'm using Spellbinders Splatter White product and a water brush. This is a medium-sized water brush, and I'm just adding a generous amount of splatter onto my ink blended area. I did not want to add splatter onto the entire background. That's why I'm keeping the mask in place there. I just wanted the splatter over the ink blending, and I'm being, again, very generous here. I want this to look like there's a ton of snow falling, like this is a nice and fun wintry day. With the ink blending done, I'm going to carefully clean my desk and remove the mask. If you are careful, the mask will work for a few ink blended sessions. So if you want to make several cards, you can definitely reuse this mask again. I first made the same mask using thin printer paper, and it did not last long. It barely lasted for one background, and it just didn't work for me. So I remade the mask using thicker cardstock. With this background done, I brought it to my paper trimmer, and now I'm trimming this down slightly. So I'm cutting about 1/4 inch from each side just because I want this panel to be smaller, because I plan to foam mount it onto an A2 fog card base by Simon Says TM, just because I want to bring an additional color to this card. I do have a little bit of gray already on my coloring, and I'm going to tie that gray together with a card base, with a gray card base. I think that's going to look really nice. I used thin foam adhesive squares, and I foam mounted the panel onto a gray card base. And next I have an action wobbler here. This is a mini one, and I'm going to use it to add my penguin onto the card. I have a decent stash of action wobblers, and I generally use them for Christmas or winter cards because I feel like they kind of make the most sense for these types of cards. And this is like my favorite kind of interactive card making. It's very easy. You don't really need super fancy dies or anything like that. You just need the action wobblers, and you can make any critter or any element interactive. With that done, you can see I've added my penguin onto the background. You can see how he wobbles there. I'm just going to add a couple of gems. These are the opal gems from Simon. I'm using my Barely Art glue and the embellishment wand to add these onto the card, and this card is finished. My second card is going to be finished in the exact same way. Again, I'm using a mini action wobbler, and I'm adding my other penguin onto the card. And here's a look at the both cards I have for you today, created with the Simon Says Stamp Polar Christmas stamp set. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys. I hope you feel inspired to create. I hope you're going to give this stamp set a try and maybe play with some wobblers as well. See you again soon.